Hello, welcome to Political News and Political Views. I'm Todd Schleiger, and this is my friend Ryan Jones. And we on our show we don't have no teleprompters, no cue cards. It's just ad-lib conversation to what's going on in politics and in our state and our country as well. So we don't try to convince you to take our advice or our opinions. We just want you to think and what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. But either way, we just want you to gather your own research and opinions and be smart about what you do here with our elections nowadays. Now, back to talking with you, Ryan.
All right.
We have so much going on in our state and in our country. We have the elections coming up, the primary, I should say, with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. We have the COVID-19 virus going around in our country and around the world. They've just recently brought it up as a pandemic. And on that view right there, what do you think our next step should be for
regarding
country?
that? The entire apparatus, I mean, every country is deploying everything it possibly can, as well they should. It's in everyone's interest to do just that. The real issue there is it's an inevitability. There's going to be a lot of exposure once it's into the general public, and it is. Really, I feel that what everyone is doing with these measures, these isolation measures, I just saw that Disneyland in California has closed itself off for the next month. A lot of school closures are buying time, and the more time they buy, the better chance there's going to be a vaccine or better treatment in effect, so that by the time it reaches large numbers of people, we'll be able to treat it effectively.
Right.
Rather than.
I got a question for you. Just out of opinion wise, do you think that they're overblowing the hazard of it, or maybe I shouldn't phrase it that way? I realize it's a strain of influenza to an extent. It's a new strain, I should say. But I mean, do you believe all the hype that's coming with it, or do you think maybe I'm over exaggerating on it?
There is a definite element of truth to what's being said. Obviously, it is dangerous. About 5,000 people have died from this, and that's no small number of people. It is not something to be taken lightly.
Right.
I think that by its nature, by the nature of what's going on in our country, has it been politicized? Absolutely, it has. But I think that when you're talking about are we overreacting to it, it depends who you're talking about, because the disease is attacking certain demographics much harder than others.
Right.
The younger you are, it seems that the better off you are. Small children seem to throw it off quite easily by at least the reports I've seen. And then, but the elderly are the ones having a very hard time, or those with a terrible pre-existing condition
Right.
suffer greatly.
Now, some of the numbers that I've seen earlier today, worldwide, and I'm going to round these numbers off. Roughly, it's been 130,000 worldwide confirmations of having the virus. And totally, you're right, it's almost 5,000 who have died from it. There's no missed numbers on that. Actually, it's a little lower, but not by much. We'll round it off to it. But the numbers that I'm seeing that they have not reported are the ones that have recovered, which is nearly 69,000.
Right.
And you don't hear them reporting the recovered numbers, which, if you look at that number there, that the 69,000 that you just pointed out to me, that's almost 50%, well, actually a little higher than 50% who have recovered than the numbers that it's actually confirmed across the world. So, I mean, you're right. There is some demographics with it. It's the elderly that's being affected the worst, and those with pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart.
Emphysema, or if they're frequent smokers, people with already existing respiratory
Unfortunately,
ailments.
I'm one of those smokers.
There you are. If you are somebody who has a loved one in a retirement home,
Now, see, now that you brought that up, this is the numbers. I mean, there's been 39 deaths in the United States, last I knew. 60% of them are from a retirement home in the city of Seattle, Washington. I mean, 26 of the deaths are at that retirement home, senior home, whatever you want, assisted living, however you want to phrase it. And the other 13 are across the country. I think California has the second highest. And again, that points to our seniors that really need to be careful with it. I mean, the one, I guess if you want to look at one good part about it, it's not affecting, I think they said there was hardly any children that were affected by it that were 10 and younger.
yes,
I mean, if you want to look at a good portion of it, I mean, because generally with the flu that we've had, like the swine flu and the bird flu and what's this, H1N1, it had no different demographics with it. I mean, it was affecting children and seniors and all in between.
SARS and MERS.
Right.
And you had, in those cases, it's interesting to look back in history now that they're being frequently compared to the coronavirus. Each of them had different elements which made them more or less communicable, more or less severe. And the coronavirus, by all accounts, is a fairly communicable thing.
I think we should be calling it by its name, which is COVID-19,
COVID-19,
because all these
Yes.
influenzas are all
To be more
coronaviruses,
precise.
along
Yeah,
with the common
alright.
cold, which is a rhinovirus, but it's still a coronavirus. That way, there's no mistake in what we're
Right.
speaking about. And the whole thing is, I mean, we all need to take care and caution with what we're doing. I mean, washing our hands frequently, I get, is a good way to start. Because I haven't heard how long the virus can live on items, and I mean, I've actually at work I've seen them washing doorknobs all over the factory over it.
It's a contact point.
Yeah,
And that's where you're likely, one person touches it, the next person touches it. And so, being that extra layer of caution is not,
It
it's
helps.
not as if it hurts.
right. And I mean, and where I work, and I'm in the transportation industry, I mean, that's no secret, at least anybody who's watched our show before. And where I go in there to pick up bills for a load or anything like that, there's a big sign up there now that says, if you cough or sneeze, we're bringing you a mask. I haven't seen them run out there with anybody for a mask yet, but that's what they got out there posted.
But that is what they say when the masks are most useful for people who are sick. It
Right.
prevents it from spreading as much, whereas people who aren't sick, it doesn't really do anything for them.
Okay. Now, with the state of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, I'll be nice. I have other names for her.
I remember you had one last time.
Whitholm
Yes.
is what I call her. Governor Whitholm. But she has enacted the state of emergency for the state of Michigan. Now, I don't know if this is a precursor, or some people I've talked to said that she'd done this a little too early, but I kind of agree with some of the issues that she's done with it because of the fact it enables and enacts some of the services that we have here in Michigan for such a situation. And I've heard both sides of the story from people's opinion. I haven't heard from, other than her on her interviews with other radio shows and talk radio, and some of it, the majority of it, I agree with. I think she's taken the right steps on it, but
Being aggressive in the response.
yes,
I believe that would be the right thing to do. It's why I agree with much of what, in terms of what Trump did and leading out the gate with it. He took some criticism for it, But honestly, if your prerogative is to protect your constituency, being very proactive out the gate is going to more than likely net you your best result.
Right.
It may step on a few toes in the process, but
Well, they're used to stepping on toes.
Yeah, and I think the governor. I agree with you that if the governor reacting swiftly, or the president, or whomever is your best bet, because you want all of our services to be online and ready to go and at their full capacity when things actually happen.
Now, Dave's not here with us today. I mean, he's enjoying time with his
Oh,
wife
absolutely.
in
So we haven't-
Las Vegas right now. So he's not here to bring up on Trump, but I'm going to bring up on Trump for this one because you brought his name into this. Now, as of Friday at midnight, there's supposed to be closing the borders, so to speak. Maybe I shouldn't use that, but I'm going to. It's self-explanatory. But for those who are coming from Europe, they're banned from coming in
saw that.
to the United States. Now, I thought that was a good idea because you've got a mass outbreak in Italy right now. And now I'm hearing that 219 Democrats put together a law to try to overturn what Trump just did. Now, in my opinion, that's a mistake on the Democratic Party right there. Because I think Trump, I hate to say it, but I think he had good intentions to ban them like we banned China from coming over here, which I think was a great idea. And to the fact that with the virus, we want to try to keep the virus out. That's why right now we have roughly, I think, 1,500 confirmed cases in the United States, give or take 100, because, I mean, the number's changing constantly. And I would like to keep that as low as possible and see it go the other way, but I know it's going to rise even more. I mean,
It's inevitable.
common sense,
Yes.
it's going to happen. But at the same time, I don't think this was wise for Congress to be doing that. I don't think the Senate that portion of the Congress, the Senate, is going to allow it to go through. And I know Trump definitely isn't going to let it go through. Your opinion on that? Or
that is, I can't help but wonder if the resistance to his move towards Europe would be the same if it came from a Democratic president.
that's part of it right there,
I think there is a
I think
good
there's
chunk
too much
there.
hatred for the one man and not
It's-
thinking about...
Yeah.
I think they're trying to use it, like we said earlier, they're politicizing it. I think they're trying to use it as a tool.
And I'm trying to avoid, because I am by no means any kind of expert on the subject of COVID-19, but to my mind, digging as many trenches as possible.
Well,
I mean, obviously
neither
we
of
must
us are
just-
experts on any of this that we're up here. We're just normal
Of course,
people
right?
that we just happen to be on.
You want to dig as many trenches as possible as this thing, because we're buying time.
Right.
We are buying time. There was talk a couple weeks ago that a group in Israel had made progress on a vaccine already. The more time we buy, the fewer people are infected. Before that is available, the more lives are saved. It's very straightforward. In that aspect of it, there's always the question, especially in this country, the very valid and just question is, where do you draw the line? Where do the civil rights end and that begin? Where does that end and where do civil rights override it? I think that's always something that should always be asked, as I think most people would agree. I don't think that's a very controversial stance to take. But at the same token, you have the Democratic Party is in the process of playing this up because they calling it Trump's Katrina, and they want this to push him over. And the Republicans, on the other hand, are like, too many of them are very flippant about it because that's what they feel they need to be. It's like, oh, it's nothing. We're just going to run this over, and it's nothing more than the common code. And I don't feel either of them are really approaching that as a group. I'm sure these individuals are handling it very justly and very conscientiously towards their constituency. Those are going to occur. But I feel it has been, again, we've managed to take something that shouldn't be politicized and just turn it into a complete political football.
I mean, what happened to doing what was best for the constituency or the country? I mean, from what I've talked to you about and Dave's talked to you about how I have issues with Governor Whitcomb. And the reason I call her that is because she reminds me so much of Jennifer Granholm. And a lot of people disagree with me on this, but there's a lot more that agree with me on it. Like I said, I will give her credit for the way she activated the state of emergency for the state. Because, again, that activates certain services and offices to help fight this. But she just, this is the only time you're going to hear me give her credit, unless she does something else that I can actually say that to. Because she's perturbed me quite often with the way she's always reaching out for money from the people, you know. I mean, she's made promises, of course, to fix the damn roads, and that's her quote, not mine. And then she turns around and wants to raise our gas tax 45 cents, which, for once, I was glad the Republicans stepped in on that, you know. But the whole thing is, this is the only time probably that I'm ever going to give her credit for it, and that was what she did with this COVID-19. The rest of the stuff that she's done, I mean, she's, when she came out with her budget originally, her first budget, of course, yes, it had the 45-cent gas tax in it, and when the Republicans turned it down, she's politicized disabled people as far as children with autism, veterans, and everything else, trying to get the Republicans to come back to the table, which we should never, ever weaponize our families. And I'm going to say families because most of us have children, or we know somebody who's disabled some form or another. I can't remember the senator's name, but he has an autistic child, and I believe wholeheartedly she aimed that directly to him when she took, and it was only, and believe me, it was only I'm going to say measly $1 million that goes to that.
In the context of the greater budget.
Yeah, which was $60 billion, I believe it was, or $61.2 billion. It's that $1 million, to me, in my mind, I'm thinking it's couch change that you find digging around in your couch, but yet she managed to weaponize it towards that senator.
She's chosen the sword rather than the olive branch in that regard.
Well, you know, I know there's times, I mean, right now, during our times right now, the Democrats and Republicans don't want to work together. I mean, they would rather fall on the sword, so to speak, in order, other than claim victory between the two. I mean, they won't give, all right, let me just do it this way. The Democrats won't give to the Republicans unless the Democrats can claim a victory over the Republicans, and vice versa. I don't want, you know, anybody to think I'm choosing one party or the other. It shouldn't be that way. They need to come together as our representatives and actually do something for the state or for the country, not try to get a win over the other party.
And that's kind of, we do have this mentality, and there's a old story, and it, as I believe it goes, a Gaulish king, he takes over this Roman town, and he seizes the entire thing, and he sets up his tax system. So he sets up these scales, and these the various Romans in the town, they have to come and they have to pay him in gold, and is to weigh out the scales. And one of the Romans realizes that the scales are rigged and that they're paying more than what they had stated they had to pay. And so he approaches this king and he says, your scales are rigged. This is unfair. You're not treating us fairly in the way in which we should be treated, in the which you said we are. And so the king looks at him and he takes his sword and he throws it on the scale on the wrong side of it, which completely, of course, throws the scales askew. And he says to him, "Vae victis," which is woe to the vanquished. And that's kind of our politics now.
Right.
It's like we want to watch the other side suffer as much as they want to get anything done. And that's a very destructive place to be in terms of our greater politics, because it's a specter that looms over everything. from this COVID-19 politicization to the primary. You can even see it within that. You know, you have some of Bernie Sanders supporters they've decided after these comments that they're done with the Democratic Party and they're walking away, and it's probably not an advantageous thing given their stated goals.
Now, how does that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, did you think it would go the direction that it is?
In my heart of hearts, I didn't see that Sanders, I knew it would always be an uphill battle. Let me phrase it that way. I didn't expect that kind of route at all. I thought he would take. I thought Mr. Sanders would take Michigan. I really did, because he took it against Hillary Clinton. I think the lesson learned from the primary is the most advantageous position to be in as a politician recently is be someone running against Hillary Clinton.
Well, Dave laughs at me over this because I always call Hillary Clinton the ice queen. But what happened with Bernie, I mean, right now, there's a lot of Bernie supporters that feel that it's being stolen from Bernie again. But I mean, I actually thought Biden was out of it up until South Carolina. And of course, I think South Carolina was Joe Biden's
the firewall, as they call it.
Or you know, but it surprised me. Bernie knew he wouldn't do well in South Carolina. But I don't think he thought he'd do as bad as he did down there.
No, I think it was a surprise. Well, what they kind of found was, you know, Bernie Sanders relies heavily on this kind of youth movement, and he gets all the support on college campuses. Is very vocal, but it's something to the tune of 7 to 9% of them actually show up to vote. So they're electorally they make themselves irrelevant. I mean, it's there for the taking, and they choose not to, as a large group. So they're quite vocal, but quite ineffective electorally speaking, to his great disadvantage.
And again, you know, you mentioned this. Bernie thought he had Michigan, and it surprised him this time too that Joe took it. But you had, if I remember right, I can't remember his name. The guy in South Carolina, Clyburn.
Yeah.
He endorsed Joe, and that kind of flipped it in South Carolina a little higher for Joe. And if I also remember right, Jesse Jackson endorsed Bernie in Michigan. But it didn't help him there. I think if out of the 6 states that were in Super Tuesday 2.0, as they called it, Biden took 4 of the states. Bernie only took Washington and North Dakota, I think it was, or is it South Dakota? North Dakota.
I'd have to look at the map now.
Yeah,
it's spun all around.
But it's one of the Dakotas either way. The population isn't very high in either of those states. But the whole thing was he had a good idea that he was going to win Washington, just like he knew he would win California. But Michigan surprised the hell out of him.
Yeah, there's a meme out there, and you may have seen it. It's very frequently on the YouTube ads of Bernie, and he's kind of walking towards the camera, and he's saying, I'm once again asking you for your financial support. And then people will take that and they'll change it around. And one that was very recently put up was, I am once again losing the primary. And they threw another word in there that's not appropriate for television.
Right.
But, I thought, well, that probably speaks well about what his base is feeling right now, because 2016 had such heartbreak in it, and there was so much. This is more of a clean loss in a lot of ways. In the primary against Clinton, you had there's video of it of the Nevada when it went to Hillary Clinton. Yeah, the caucus out there, and people they're going with a yay or nay vote, and believe it was Boxer was the one running it there, and she. I may be wrong on that, but it just shows her on a screen, and she just calls for the yay or nays, and it says, "Oh, the yays have it," just immediately, and you hear just this massive boos,
right?
Because the people can't believe she just did that and just dropped them right into Hillary Clinton's lap. So, but none of that has happened. this year.
Not yet, but
Nothing
I
to
don't
that.
even know if we're going to get to hear any of that
Right.
because I don't think. I mean, Joe and the Democratic, the DNC, I think, is trying to call for the end of the primary.
I think that would be to their great disadvantage because that debate needs to happen. And it might not go particularly well for Joe Biden, but he's not going to be able to get away in the general from debating the president.
Right.
It's going to be a grudge match. It's going to be, everything Trump touches turns into a grudge match. And it just does. I like to compare him to the bad guy from a wrestling match because this is how he kind of comes into politics. He gets out there on the stage and he throws out his body language and he just starts making these declarative statements. And, his base loves every second of it and his opponents hate it just as much. And, of course he's going to do that to Joe Biden. I mean, he already has been. It's only going to be escalated. And so for Joe Biden to go against Bernie Sanders in a debate, that's going to be a good testing for himself, if nothing else, good testing grounds of what's to come, where he's going to be an extended period of time against one candidate. That's going to be, because Bernie's no slouch when he gets on a roll. He will just go and go. And I think Biden needs that tempering, before he goes up against Trump, just so, if only for the sake of his own side, to understand where he's weak in that regard, and then maybe they can strategize and plan around it. Hiding from that fight that's going to come. It
would be good practice for him.
Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't debate Bernie, he's avoiding a lesser fight than the one that is going to come inevitably. And I really think it's a mistake on their part not to.
It would give him practice at least. And not only that, I mean, right now, if you pay attention to some of the media groups, they're saying that the DNC is actually keeping Joe out of the media.
That's what I've heard.
I mean, his last little speech that he gave was only 7 minutes long.
Yeah, and it's a dangerous move.
I think so. And then him getting into it with the auto worker.
Yeah, oh my gosh. That reminded me so much of when Clinton got up and Billy, I want to say it was in Pennsylvania, but she got up on the stage and says, "Yeah, we're going to close a lot of coal mines, and a lot of coal miners are going to lose their jobs." And to her credit, it's usually cut out of the clips because that's the clip they like to throw at her. But she then went on to say, "But we're going to replace them. We're going to start these green energy industries. We're going to do all this." But if you're a pensioned coal mine worker, if you're working in a coal plant and somebody says, "Okay, everything you've worked for your whole life, we're going to throw it out the window, but don't worry, we're going to give you this shiny new thing we really promise." You're going to say, "Oh, but no, thank you." And that is not the way to go if you're approaching the electorate. And so to say to an auto worker, the things that were said there was not,
and he had the right
at the best, not tactically sound.
I mean, the auto worker, all he did was he came up to Joe Biden. He says, "I heard you're going to take our guns away." And Joe Biden told him he was full of bleep.
Yeah.
And then there was some other derogatory remarks made about a pony and a long horse face and all this other things too. But the whole thing is he shouldn't have attacked that constituent.
No.
He should have told him what his ideas were. And he made a Joeism, his gaffe, talking about a AR-14, which there is no such thing, but that's an easy one to mix.
Yeah, it is, and it's not really harmful.
Right.
It's only the people who want to be harmed by it.
It was the "you're full of bleep" that was harmful, and one of his handlers, or whatever you want to call him, that was there with him of his party, tried to come in there and he shushed her away. How is he going to handle that? I mean, is he going to be able to go? Do you think he's going to go toe to toe with Trump?
Well, you remember during the primary, there's a Warren supporter who, it was an older gentleman, as he was, and he kind of got up there and got in Biden's face, heckled him a bit, and Biden challenged him to push-ups.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that conjures an image of him on a debate stage with Trump challenging him to push-ups and having these two 70-year-old men having a push-up contest for president, which is an entertaining mental image, but a little terrifying. But I guess his saving grace in that respect is that for any amount that Joe's going to say something like that, Trump is every bit as likely to say something that's pugilistic, and it'll make for lovely debates.
Well, there's no way of getting around it. I firmly believe they need to actually have a debate between the two of them. Whether, Bernie, I think, feels that he'd chew Joe up, and he probably would, because I think he has more of his mental faculties than what Joe does. I mean, I'm sure Joe's a nice guy and everything, but I mean, there's issues there, and you can see it.
If it's an unstructured debate, Bernie will just run him over. He just doesn't react right or fast enough, tactically speaking. I'm not talking about the quality of the argument.
Right.
Like maybe if they sat down and argued positions in a very reserved and regimented sort of way, I think Biden would do much better. But if they get into the matches like they were in the other primaries, where they're just going at each other,
Right.
I think Bernie would just bowl him over with just pure rhetoric.
All right,
and I don't mean that in the negative term of rhetoric, just
Right.
in the sense that he just goes.
With some of their platform that they're talking about, I mean, you give your opinion on it, and then I'll give you mine. The Green New Deal.
Of noble intent, but what they say about good intentions. Much of it was presented in such an incredibly vulnerable and silly way, or pie in the sky sort of way.
Right.
I don't think that every part of it is bad, and some of it is factually correct regarding the agriculturist industry and where these greenhouse gases are coming from.
Right.
So the presentation, the solutions tend to be on the outlandish or extreme side, and to just throw it out there. I think they needed to approach it in less an extreme way, but they weren't. Everything they said was not inherently wrong, but you guys all lumped in with the silliness of
Right.
aspects of it,
Well,
and then it all we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's like, I think I brought this up on our last show. If we were to go wind and solar towards our electric grid, I think it's DTE who wants to be 80% renewable by the year 2040 and 100% no carbon emissions, zero carbon emissions by 2050. They just asked the state if they could raise their rates. And the state, of course, I think if I remember right, they asked for a 9% increase, and they ended up with a 5% increase, right in there anyways. If you go back and pay attention to it and actually figure out the numbers, it would cost us, if we went wind and solar, $120 billion, not us. Well, it's going to cost us because there's no way DTE is going to swallow the bill on this. They're going to want to raise the rates to cover it. $120 billion to go solar and wind. Or solar and wind. Okay? And those big windmills, they only have a 10-year lifespan on the average. Then they have to be replaced, the motors and generators. If we were to use natural gas burners in order to generate electricity like we do now currently, that's only $13 billion. And that's to generate 37 gigawatts. Okay? There's a huge difference between $13 billion and $120 billion.
Quite.
Not to mention the job loss. But yet, I mean, people have said, we're going to create all these jobs by going to renewables, but they're not telling you about all the jobs that people have been employed for 20, 30 years that aren't going to, or those are the ones that are going to be pushed out retired. But the 10, 15-year people who've been doing all this work prior, and then all of a sudden they got to be re-educated to do the new renewables.
There's a fictional story that's used that economists like to use as an illustrative, and it's the baker's store window. And I can keep it very quick on this, but basically, so some youth chucks a rock through a bakery store window, shatters the glass, and then everyone gathers around the window in the morning and say, "Oh, how awful that is!" But then somebody in a moment of supposed enlightenment says, but wait, now the maker has to pay to have the window repaired, and then that makes work for the glass repairman, and he goes through all this,
Right.
this very, about how it's really a good thing, and we should find this person and thank them because they've generated activity in the economy. But the story, the real lesson of the story is the opportunity cost, that baker now has to pay for the window, and whatever amount he would have spent on that window is not being spent otherwise. He may have
Right.
reinvested it in his business and created another job, or whatever marginal effect that might have had. The point of it is not to take it to exactly your point. There's a massive opportunity cost if you're to switch over industries, and all these people are that opportunity
Well,
cost.
you've also got, along with the renewable energy, you've got the Green New Deal pushing for getting rid of all the combustible engines. Okay, we don't have an infrastructure
We don't.
that would support
actually
all the E EVs.
And an idea I've heard, that's another pie in the sky one, but you have the sawgrass that can be used for like ethanol and that sort of thing on the one hand, but the infrastructure simply is not there.
It
You're
isn't.
entirely correct. I mean, you know that from your industry in particular.
Exactly.
Spoke with somebody that their suggestion was, if you're going to do that, you almost need a Manhattan Project style thing to accomplish it,
That
because it's
is-
such a big thing.
That goes against what the majority of the people in the country want. They don't want big government.
Yeah.
In order to put an infrastructure together like that, the government would have to come in. Of course, now we can say the government's going to fund it, but let's be truthful about it. That's us funding it, which means our taxes are going to go up drastically. It's not a bad idea. I understand all that. And yes, it would alleviate a lot of carbon emissions. But the problem that I have with it, this is a big, big planet, okay? And even if we were to do it just here in Michigan, I mean, Michigan only takes up 0.005 of the planet as far as acreage. That ain't going to hardly do anything to the ozone for carbon emissions, okay? But the whole thing is, they've got everybody believing in this new Green Deal that's on the far, let me restate that, to the far, far left.
The ones that are just fully entrenched behind
AOC,
it. Yeah.
and Rashida Tlaib, and the squad, the four that annoy me daily.
They've made it an issue that is of the political divide, which is, I'm not all on board with the Green New Deal. I think there are parts of it that were correct in something that should be addressed. But I do agree that many of the solutions were like,
yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been many a times, and you have scientists that say that mankind's adding to the carbon emissions, which I'm sure we are. I mean, there's 7 billion of us. But before us, there was times when there was more carbon in the atmosphere than there is even now. And it had nothing to do with us because we weren't here.
Well, times when the oxygen content was much higher, the environment has changed over time a great deal. I tend to err on the sides of those who have proven themselves to know better than I.
But I mean,
in that regard.
the only reason I know that argument is because you have all these documentaries on where these scientists go up to the Arctic and down to Antarctica and take ice.
The core samples.
And they're reading all the oxygen and levels and carbon levels. I mean, from millions of years ago.
That's why you'll see plants or fossils of, not to sidetrack too badly, but you'll see plants or fossils of really giant insects. You think, man, I'm glad those aren't around. Good news, they can't be, because they relied upon an oxygen content in the air that doesn't exist now.
That's why they got smaller. We'll leave it at that part on that. But
so a point to bring up when we talk about that, people wish for smaller government, and I think a great many people do. They don't want people invasive in your life. That's inherent to the American experience in a lot of ways. But I would say, and this is another one where there are people who have argued against what I'm going to say that are of much higher pedigree, and I've heard good ones. But when you go back and you look at like the FDR and the New Deal, and that's a point of contention. It's trotted out on the left to say, look how much good the government can do, look how much infrastructure was built, and how many good things were done by the New Deal. And then there are particularly, I've heard it not more recently within the last decade or so kind of thing, but when that's brought up, there are counter arguments saying that the economy was going to rebound and it was on its way back anyway, and it would have come back all the stronger had the government not gone to such great intervention. I believe it is a point to always consider that the New Deal had the great impact that it did, regardless of whether or not one wants to say it may have done better without it.
Right.
But I think is a fair point made by the Keynesian school to say the New Deal was a potent thing.
Right. I mean, Bernie's always comparing what he wants to do with our country to Denmark and Sweden.
Yeah.
Denmark's actually come back out and said, hey, don't utilize us no more.
Like, stop saying stuff.
Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. We're more capitalism than you think. But the whole thing is, when they use this argument, and again, I've been an independent all my life, and I learned a valuable lesson from my last campaign that I have to choose one of the two main parties. And I figured out I'm more of a Democrat than I am a Republican, more of a centrist. But when I went back and I look at all these things that Bernie's promising and the Democrats are promising, we'll use just Elizabeth Warren and Bernie, for example. Bernie always throws Denmark and Sweden out there. But he won't tell the American public what this is all going to cost us. He just says, your taxes will go up. Well, if you look at Denmark, their tax base is between 44 and 60%. I don't know any of us that would admit it right out front that they want, and for our $100 that we're making this week, and I don't mean that literally, but the $100 we're making this week, I don't feel like I'm going to give the federal government $60 out of that $100. Not only, if that was the case, and all these businesses are going to pay that high tax as well, probably a little higher like they do in Denmark, they had to raise their prices up, And I had one guy who told me, he says, well, you go to work, and if you want something from the grocery store, you just go to the grocery store, get what you want, and go home. You don't pay for it.
That seems perilous.
That's
at best.
Communism. Yeah. That's basically the definition of communism. You just go over here.
Except you stand in line behind the 800 other people who are waiting for that can of beans.
And I've been to a communistic country. I go to China. I've been there 4 times in the last year. And when you go to the grocery store, you still pay for that food. You just, when you come back home, you don't pay for your rent. You don't pay for your utilities. But if you want to eat, you have to pay for that food. And they don't make much money over there. The government, everybody works for the government.
The countries Bernie Sanders likes to cite in Europe, in Northern Europe in particular, they tend to have populations about the size of LA, and they tend to be their productivity rate of their labor productivity is through the roof compared to ours, and that you combine those two things, you're supporting less people on much more productivity from each, and you can have a very high tax rate and do a lot for that small number of people.
And they're really not socialized countries. They have socialized medicine.
Right.
And, we if you want to really, our schools, our public schools, would be a form of socialism because it's K through 12 is public. In other words, it's free. The government provides it for our kids. Over there, it's provided by them, their government, plus some of them have free college. But again, their tax base is over 50%. And the people in America, when you start talking about raising taxes, we all run the other way.
Yeah.
Right now, I pay just under 24%, which is the average, 23.8% for Americans right now. Of course, if you make more money, you're going to pay a little more until you get up to so far, then you pay a little less. But the whole thing is, that's how our system is set up. Now you get somebody who wants to say, I'm going to give you free college, I'm going to give you free health care, and the word free is not free. And I think Americans are smarter than that, and when they hear the word free, they know it's not really free. Somebody's got to pay for it. It's not the federal government saying they're paying for it, because we're paying for it. That's our tax dollars. So, there's a lot of different systems out there, but I think where Bernie made his mistake was he started, what's the word I'm looking for, with Fidel Castro. He started saying how his system was working really good down there in Cuba, and that was a bad thing for Bernie.
Such an odd line to take, wasn't it? I didn't understand why he went that route.
I think that really hurt him.
In Florida, it probably cost him everything.
Well, I don't think he's got a prayer in Florida. I mean, there's too many Cubans down there that remember Fidel Castro.
I mean, it did. It wiped him out in Florida.
And they are legal citizens now.
Yeah, it's. But not just Florida. I mean, anyone old enough or even have a cursory understanding of what went on there, you can be very critical of the U.S. intervention there.
Right.
But there's no getting around what happened in Cuba. And no getting around what the Castro government did in Cuba. And so even if you can pry out of that a sliver of good outcome, it came with such a mass of just horrible human tragedy that it's not worth anything at all.
I mean, we almost, at one point, 2 weeks ago, we almost had Bernie Sanders going to Skype in on our show. But I can't remember his PR lady's name, but she decided it wouldn't be a good idea because she asked the questions that I was going to ask of Bernie. And I emailed her a list. And one of the key questions on my list was, how do we really pay for all this? Not just his simple answer of your taxes are going up. I would have dug deep into it with him, and I think that's what kind of pushed him away from coming onto the show, because I would have loved to have the Skype set up right here and have big old picture of Bernie right here on our show.
That would have been something else. I will give him, at least he was honest that when he would tell people that, your taxes are going up, you got to give him that much.
That's the only thing I gave him credit for, because Elizabeth Warren wasn't even coming close to it.
No, we're just going to tax
She'd run away.
the mysterious rich.
Right.
That are the infinite resources.
You know as well as I do. We sit here and we attach all these heavy taxes to the rich. Where do you think they're going to do? The rich are these business owners. They're going to pass it all down to us anyways. So you can't really go that route.
To the extent they can. It will vary from industry to industry. But you're right.
Do you realize how high taxes were? The highest tax that Americans have ever paid?
Fire away. I don't know.
1941 was 94% tax. But you had to make $200,000 or more. The people who didn't make that $200,000, they weren't taxed. That's where.
So you just stop working at that point, though. You get to that amount,
no, people back then didn't, because that's World War II.
Oh, okay.
That was just before we got into the war. But at the same time, for that one period of time, our tax rate was 94%, and you can look that up. It was 94% for $200,000 a month. Now, at that 94%, and I make $200,000, okay? So that's $94,000 out of the first $100,000, $94,000 out of the second. I only made $12,000 out of $200,000. But of course, back then, $12,000 was a lot of money. I still would have liked that $94,000.
Right.
So, but this is, I mean, we're thankful that we're not there no more. The thing is, I don't want to pay 50% tax. When I ran for governor in 2018, I brought that conversation up one day on Facebook. I asked, I even wrote on there, this is a hypothetical question. How many of you would want to pay 50% tax to have free health care? And I used the word free. Oh, I mean, everybody, I was being cussed out and everything else. Yeah.
It's so strange to be offended over a question like that.
and I literally put, this is a hypothetical question. I was trying to get a poll going. I definitely didn't get one person that said they were willing to pay 50% tax. So at the same time, you know, and that was never a thought in my mind of actually having a 50% tax. But on that note right there, I asked a young millennial if he could tell me one country that was socialism that's still around, where it has actually worked.
Oh, where it's worked?
You know, I mean, they come and go. USSR, Russia. They were communists, but they were also at one point just socialists.
Well, that's the name of the country, right?
The USSR.
Yeah, right.
Now they're communists, but either way, that only lasted, I believe, 70 years. But that was under a very strict authoritarian
to say the
leader.
least.
Lenin
say the least.
and Stalin weren't the nicest people either. If they wanted you to do something, you did it. So,
have you ever heard the embellished story of the Laffer curve?
No, I've never heard that one.
Okay, so that was, you know, the curve that Reagan appreciated, and as the embellished story goes, he was talking to Laffer about the nature of the thing, and Laffer draws him out on the curve, and that is the you know, as tax rate goes up, the government revenue is going to go up too until you hit a point, and then it goes down because people will stop taking, you know, they'll stop working.
Right.
They won't, for that marginal loss, it's just not worth it to anymore. So if taxes get too high, you actually lose revenue, is the basic idea of the Laffer curve. And so as it goes, Laffer drew it out on a napkin for him, or however, and to Reagan, it spoke to him personally, because when he was an actor, actors would produce like 4 movies a year, 5, I can't remember which, but they'd produce this fixed number of movies, and then they just stop working, because that next movie it wouldn't be worth it to them to bother with, because they'd be taxed so heavily for making that movie, they wouldn't do it. And so to his mind, he saw that Laffer curve, and that immediately spoke to his life experience. And as the story goes, that's part of why he became a big believer in it. He says, oh, you know, I understand this completely. This makes perfect sense. And I always thought that was an interesting.
Now, one of the things that, I mean, I have 2 favorite presidents, you know, and I was only alive for one of them. My 2 favorite presidents were John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. Now, I didn't believe in Reaganomics. I mean, as I got older and I realized what this were, trickle-down economics don't work.
Trickle-down, you know, that's actually pejorative. It was the term trickle-down economics was never used by its proponents.
Right.
It was used by the people who disliked it.
Yep.
And then people randomly picked it up, and it became so ingrained with the concept that
Reaganomics got turned into trickle-down economics. You know, the theory was back then that if you gave the tax breaks to the rich, it would trickle down to the people below. Well, nobody ever figured in the greed factor. So, you know, and with that factor there, they started making more money, and they figured, well, I don't have to pass this down. You know, more or so is what it worked as, you know, and then after that went through, but it did pick up the economy. So, I mean, every time there's been tax cuts, our economy goes up. You know, the businesses do better, the people do a little bit better.
Supply side economics.
Right. And so, you know, at the same time, I think if I were to choose to run again for the governor of Michigan, I think I would set it up that if the businesses are going to get a tax break from me and we set this up across the board, you're going to have to give me something. In other words, you're going to have to guarantee jobs, you know, for these tax breaks. if you can't keep your promise, I'm not going to keep my promise.
Local
Not that I'm
investment.
planning any
Well, you
of
want
this.
them to invest locally so that
Right.
the
you
local
know,
economy bears the fruit of
because, hey,
their
if the
gain.
people in your economy, in your state, are going to do better, they're going to spend more within your state. Of course, they're going to spend more in other states too because they're going to be able to afford more vacations and everything like that. But the idea is our government, whether it be state government or national government or federal government, their job is to make our lives better, not stress us out. You know, and with that thought, we're getting ready to end the show for today. We've reached our time limit. I don't know if we've annoyed each other enough yet, like Dave and I always do. But at that same time, we want you to think and do your research before you just accept any opinion that you hear, so that way you can educate yourself and make a good decision. Anything you want to add to that?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, Dave always does this better than me. I mean, I'm not used to coming in here and sitting in the first chair. This is Dave's chair, you know. But at the same time, you know, no matter what, when we come in here, Dave and I you've seen us in some knockdown, drag out conversations, but we always leave here
Absolutely.
as friends. So
Yeah, that's great.
with that in mind, have yourself a good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.